Greetings. Welcome to all of you who have joined us for our webinar today. And we're so pleased that you're here with us. We're going to give folks just another minute to get logged on. I see we've got a couple people just getting on, so we want to get them rolling. Unfortunately, Peter, I see you're online. Looks like you're having a bad connection there. So unfortunately, if any of you do have any bad connections or have trouble hearing as we're moving along, there will be a recording available of this. That's available on our website. So it takes a couple days to get it up there, but it'll be available just in case you miss some stuff you don't want to miss. And I know for a fact that everything Steve Schave says, you are not going to want to miss any of it. So
you say that now.
Well, you always try to build it up beforehand, you know.
There you go.
Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and get rolling. It looks like we've got everybody that's going to get on here for the moment anyway. And again, we're so glad to have you with us today. And we're pleased to have Reverend Dr. Stephen Schave with us, director of, oh gosh, I'll let you tell it what he's the Mission Field USA guy and the Urban Inner-City guy and the guy I would voted most likely to be my tag team partner if we're ever in the ring together. So he is going to present on opioid abuse today, a very serious problem. And I know, Steve, you've talked several times lately about this even becoming kind of a bigger problem through the pandemic and some of the resulting folks being isolated and falling off the wagon and things like that. So this is a very timely webinar for us. I think one of those God things. When we planned this a year ago, we didn't realize what we'd be moving out of right now. So we give thanks to God that he got us on here. Again, if you have any questions for Steve will present for us today, and then at the end we'll have a little Q&A time. And if you have any question for Steve, there is an opportunity. If you go up on the left-hand side and you open that sidebar, there's an attendee chat feature there. You can type your questions on the attendee chat feature there, or at the top bar of the AnyMeeting page there's a little three dots. There's a little speech bubble there. That's audience questions. So you can put your questions in either of those places if you have any questions for Pastor Schave as we move along. And without further ado, let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Lord, we know that in the sin-fallen world there is much trial and trouble, and especially for some people to try to deal with that and cope, and especially in these days of pandemic and isolation, there have been so many ways that we try to medicate ourselves, and the influence of illicit drug use and opioid addiction and all sorts of things are clouding the hearts and minds of so many. We pray, Lord, that you would be with us today during our webinar, that we would learn much from Dr. Schave, and that you would send us forth to do that work which you have planned in advance for us to do according to your good and gracious will for those folks who are hurting and needing to hear the beauty of the gospel message in Jesus Christ. It's in his name that we pray. Amen. All right, Steve, take it away.
All right, and thank you, Todd, for the invitation. And yes, I am the Urban and Inner-City Mission guy, but certainly our Mission Field USA church planting is in every location where we need the presence of the gospel. And I know that Todd and I would definitely be his tag team partner, and we joke around about who has the best wrestlers, whether it's the city or the country. But I do have quite a background in small town. Both my parents grew up in farm communities in Illinois. Love to go back and visit Hillsdale and Brimfield and see my parents' homeland there. And happy too, though, that when my dad moved us out to the city, I've had some great experiences and even serving in the inner city. But today we're going to talk about a topic that really does affect every single part of our country. Specifically, we'll be focusing on opioid abuse in rural and small town settings. Before I get into it too much, I just want to say that I'm speaking from a pastoral viewpoint. It's not a clinical viewpoint, but I want to talk about how the church really can respond in practical ways through ministry. You can see in the presentation, it talks about the Denarius Project, a catalyst for community change. And really that is a focus specifically on helping with people who are suffering from addiction, who are in the recovery process, and giving them a second chance at life. And I'll talk about how all that fits in with this overall Denarius project, especially as it applies to those who are in the context of rural and small town. As Pastor Kolbaum mentioned at the beginning, as he alluded to, there really is almost a double pandemic that's been happening in the midst of COVID-19. You can only imagine, and we can't really overlook the impact that this is having on people going through the recovery process. This is about a community coming around somebody and helping them with fighting a very, very difficult challenge. And isolation then can be just devastating for people, especially those who are just now beginning the process. And so it was the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy Director Jim Carroll who said the threat posed by COVID-19, along with the mitigation measures in place across the country to prevent its spread, makes accessing treatment and maintaining recovery especially challenging. We must act boldly and creatively to ensure that people get the treatment they need. And so, again, this idea of people being sheltered in place is extremely challenging for how we are going to do ministry in those situations. So I'll try to touch on some practical things and tools that are out there that will help with that very thing. But as you can see from the comments, in other words, this is an epidemic, the opioid epidemic, which is only being worsened by a pandemic. And so we've heard many times the statistics that the increase in substance abuse has really increased exponentially, as you can just hear about the alcohol sales and also people who are buying illegal drugs as well. But it's a little bit different, obviously, in the city or in the country. We heard about the pandemic and the staggering numbers of people who have been affected by COVID-19, but that might not play out so much in, more sparsely populated areas as they would densely populated areas. So you might be thinking, well, is the opioid epidemic really an epidemic? Is it that much of a problem for us? And isn't that just what happens in the large cities in the United States? But really, the opioid epidemic has affected almost every single family in America in some form or fashion. So just to kind of lay out the landscape of whether this truly is an epidemic, even the USDA between 1999 and 2015 noted that drug overdose deaths in rural counties had jumped by 325%, as compared to 198% in metropolitan areas. And so what that shows us is that the effects of the opioid epidemic have now kind of shifted in magnification there in our rural counties. Harvard University also released a survey of rural Americans who identified drug addiction as the biggest challenge facing their community. The number one challenge facing rural communities was drug addiction. Then in 2017, two leading farm groups, the American Farm Bureau Federation and National Farmers Union, both conducted a survey that found that nearly 50% of rural Americans and 74% of farmers have been directly impacted by opioid misuse. 50%, 74%. Those numbers are staggering. And yes, this can just be a simple case of drug addiction, but with opioid misuse, you hear story after story of people who were taking painkillers. You might have a high school star athlete, well-renowned in the community, throws out his back in a sport, is given a prescription for an opioid to help him in his recovery, and the next thing you know, he is now suffering from an addiction. And that's not to vilify the use of medicine and painkillers, because they are needed. But the point being is that we really need to, when we hear those kind of numbers, take it seriously. If I have some sort of addiction, in my own family background, I really need to take that into consideration and think about what that means. But also, as we're thinking about ministry, in the cities, it might be very out in the open, and everything that happens with sin just seems to be magnified because it's so densely populated. And maybe it goes a little bit more hidden in our rural and small town communities. But these numbers show us that it might be hidden, but it's there, and it's affecting so many people. And then the USDA goes on to say that in the face of these challenges, rural leaders are working hard in collaboration with government and private sector partners to improve their communities, to be strong and healthy rural communities. And that just goes to show you just how vastly affected, from government down, our communities have been by this, and how seriously they are taking this, and how much effort is now being put into addressing this as an epidemic, which, again, according to these numbers, it truly, truly is an epidemic. Now, because this is an issue that affects both the body and the soul, the church must find her place in making a difference. And, we want to think of this as being a sign of weakness, maybe, that somebody would fall into this addiction. But I'd like you to also think about those who have been bodily possessed by evil in the Bible. So you wouldn't just walk up to one of these people who are possessed physically by some evil and expect them just by their own willpower to will their way out of this thing. When you're talking about somebody who's suffering from an addiction, it truly possesses them. It owns them. It takes over them. The person that we formerly knew, that we see in Scripture, that person that was not in their own right mind. I mean, it is so all-consuming for them. That's why they have to hit that rock bottom, that there's just absolutely nowhere else for them to go. Except for maybe death by overdose. And so as we think about this, we want to think that this is an issue of body and soul. That's why the church needs to find our place. That's why we need to think of people who are really possessed by this drug and this addiction. And that's why the church needs to be rightfully in her place to help. So again, just to understand the gravity of this epidemic, according to the CDC, on average, 115 Americans die every day from an opioid overdose. So we need to figure out, how do we insert ourselves into these lives before they are taken by overdose. In 2016, over 11 million Americans misused prescription opioids. Nearly 1 million used heroin. So you can see there's a ramping up from a prescription opioid to then going towards heroin to get their fix that they need. Then 2.1 million had an opioid use disorder due to prescription opioids or heroin. That's a huge, huge number of Americans. So in other words, addiction doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter what family you're born into. It doesn't matter where you live. It just does not discriminate. We are susceptible, all of us, even to homelessness. Once those social ties have been broken, maybe we have to steal for our addiction to be able to continue with our habit. If we don't have those connections, it's very easy for folks to just lose everything. They lose their job, they lose their family, and then they lose their homes, and they eventually have lost all of the ties that bind. And again, that's where the church really needs to be part of building relationships, helping to get people back on their feet, helping them who are most susceptible to losing everything. So 2 very important factors that we want to talk about in terms of ministry then when it comes to recovery are getting past the stigma. People asking for help. Again, it's seen as something that's just a horrible negative. It's a weakness of character, a weakness of faith. It's a weakness of your willpower and your strength. So there's a huge stigma that's placed upon people who fall into drug addiction. And then also a factor is getting people back to being productive citizens. So we need to get them back on their feet again. And how are we going to look at both of these factors, addressing the stigma so that people know that they can come for help? without being looked down upon? And then how can we help them, not just in the short term, but in the long term, to get them back on their feet? So a couple of things that are addressed with this Denarius project especially is social enterprise and workforce development, and through the church helping to fill gaps where hope just seems void of any kind of second chance. And so whether it is helping people to find employment, helping to create the employment possibly for somebody that has no chance of getting back on their feet, no chance of employment, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. Those are the two things that we really need to focus on in our ministry, is helping them to know that they can come to us without being looked down upon, and then really looking at the holistic picture of how to help somebody get back on their feet. And so I wanted to give you a quote here. It says, "I share my family's struggle to illustrate that addiction can happen to anyone, even the brother of the U.S. Surgeon General. By sharing my story, I hope to give others the courage to share theirs so that together we can fight stigma." So that was a direct address from the U.S. Surgeon General. I was asked to be on a panel to specifically talk about this topic for getting people back to work in the recovery process, which is a big focus of the Denarius Project. And there's only a couple church bodies that have a national program like this. And so it caught the attention of the Health and Human Services Department, and I received an invitation to be a panel speaker. And the U.S. Surgeon General, in his opening remarks, wanted to make it very clear that even in his own family, he had witnessed the stigma by his own brother being incarcerated for illegal drug use and ongoing struggles with addiction. He opened up his heart to tell us this so that he could be the one leading by example to help us to understand the stigma that goes along with this. He went on to say the challenge for faith-based organizations who want to help addicts is that they must make it more attractive for an addict to recover than to get high. Why? Because recovery seems like an impossible dream. It's just easier to stay high when you are alienated from your family and no one will hire you. So again, this is where the church finds our place. How do we help to rebuild those relationships and ties, to rebuild trust? How do we help when somebody cannot find work? And if there's no one that will hire you, again, recovery then just seems like it will be an impossible dream. Now, the church has always found our place when it comes to mercy. This is nothing new for us as the church. We historically have offered emergency aid for shelter and clothing and food. So that's kind of transactional. What we would say is transactional. Somebody comes to us in need, they have a specific emergency aid that's required. As Jesus tells us, when somebody needs food, we feed them, and that's what we do. But in that kind of transaction, unwittingly, we can create an unhealthy dependency. Rather than thinking about how are we going to lift somebody out of their circumstance? How are we going to help to get somebody back on their feet? If somebody's in poverty, how will we help them to get out of poverty and addiction, rather than us continuing having that cyclical relationship where they come to us for aid? So to truly offer what I would call mercy with dignity, then, it requires making sure that they have a good education, making sure that they have job readiness, so that they're equipped to go out and to look for work. And then also, again, those ideas of what are employment opportunities that we as churches and church agencies can help to develop employment opportunities for people, if that is what we really want to do by showing mercy with dignity and wanting to be holistic in our approach. So this is new. Again, the church is typically known for, the nun, Mother Teresa's, who are there to help to clothe the naked. So this is something that's going to be more enterprising, really has to get us thinking about how we're going to look at this long-term approach for mercy work in the church, and how it needs to, again, not just be kind of that short transaction, but how can we be in it for the long haul? Because there are going to be ups and downs, and so many pastors that are involved in this. It's so challenging because you think you're on the right trajectory and everything's going great, and everything just kind of plummets again. So that means if we're going to really be involved with this healing process, we have to get into the muck and the mire. We have to deal with some major setbacks. We have to deal with these ongoing failures, and sometimes it does feel like you take one step forward and two steps back, but that's what we have to be willing to do, to be both wise and to be merciful. But again, ultimately, this requires caring. It requires caring for those who have fallen into addiction. I've noticed in my own ministry settings and helping people from around the country, it's really not that hard to get people to come and to serve their neighbors. So, somebody's down on their luck and they're willing to come and volunteer and do this or that, to hand this or that out. But that's not the same as caring for the person and whole. And so I want to talk a little bit about the difference between just people showing up and serving and people who truly care and understand that this is a child of God that we're helping. And so with that idea of getting people to care, it really requires helping them to put themselves in other shoes, to see that this other person is, as God refers to them, somebody created in his image that Christ died for. That's the apple of God's eye. And there's some things that we do that we might not even really think about that help to create that stigma, take away that person's dignity. So when you look throughout Scripture, especially in the Old Testament, you think about the biblical language of dirty, unclean, clean. What is the phrase that we typically use for somebody that falls back into addiction? We say that they're dirty. We say that they're not clean. And when somebody gets off of drugs for a certain amount of time, we refer to them as clean. So just by doing that alone with the language that we're using, we all know from Scripture what we're doing if we're calling somebody dirty or calling somebody unclean. We all are sinful, and that's my point. Is we all make that same confession: I, a poor, miserable sinner, and recognize our uncleanness and our sinfulness. And so we need to make sure that we're not looking at ourselves as being the only ones who are clean and using language towards others to make it seem as if their sin is somehow greater than our own. So again, if we were to recognize our position before God, right? If we looked at myself, I understand I am a habitual sinner. When I look at the language that even Luther himself used, we are all beggars. We all fear, love, and trust in some false idol that's evil that for any of us could eventually possess our bodies and our souls. We all break that first commandment about fearing and loving. We all create false idols. We all have nothing to offer God and have to rely solely on His grace because we're beggars, and we are all habitual sinners. So then, we have to see in the lost one and the broken one our fellow man, our neighbor, one whom God loved so much He'd send His one and only Son. And I'll step back a minute. I was actually asked to write an article for the Lutheran Witness, and it was called, "What do you see when you see a panhandler?" And so for me, I knew what they were kind of getting at. When I see a panhandler, I see somebody who's a scam artist. I see somebody who's just going to take my money and use it for drug use. I see somebody different than me, more sinful than me. Even Luther himself would refer to people when there truly was somebody in need and they couldn't find a job, and there was just kind of that beggar who was going to misuse the church's charity and mercy and use the money in a wrong way rather than just going and getting a job and getting himself out of his addiction. He called that person the squire filth. He even used that language to point out their sins. And yet at the same time, Luther talks about in the commandments, if there was something I could have done to help, right? if there was something that I could have done to help this person, to transform this person's life, there's no government program that's going to do this. Only the church can change the hearts of people. And so we have to realize that from our own eyes, as Luther says, if I could have helped somebody and they went on to suffer and potentially even die, that I am also liable to that. When we look at the commandment about not killing, that it's not just not harming, but it's that I could have done something to help and I didn't. So we need to recognize in that pain handler, that person that is truly, sinning and lying and stealing and doing all these things because they've been possessed by this evil addiction. We have to understand that we're all in the same position. That's how we can get people to care, is to see others in their shoes, to recognize that before God, we are all filthy beggars. We are all sinners who habitually sin. And so we too daily need to fix our eyes on the cross, and we too need to stand in awe every single day of God's amazing grace. That is how we can care for others, because we recognize in them that's our fellow human being and our brother and sister. And it's so easy when I was speaking recently to try to turn your eye away and to just not look at the person who is suffering. And yet God calls upon us to see in them, a fellow human being who also is a fellow sinner like ourselves. So every day we need to recognize God's grace for us so that we can share it with others. So with that said, one of the things that I wanted to point out is some practical resources. And again, as Pastor Kohlbaum pointed out, these are some ways that you can go back and look at the recording to find places that will give you practical tips on what to do. So the USDA in this first resource has put together a very thorough community action plan. So no one congregation or agency can usually do all these things together. It needs to be done in collaboration. And so the idea of community action is to find your place in the bigger picture. So when you think about the recovery process, it's extremely important to catch somebody as they are possibly coming out of a treatment center. Again, that isolated time where they come out of treatment is vital. And if there's a way that you can be involved in some sort of transitional housing first, getting them into a program first, and then helping in a long-term approach, maybe it takes 1 or 2 years in that transition to really get them stabilized, to get them back on their feet and get them back to work. So you want to have a community action plan that covers all those things, a good treatment facility, and then a long-term recovery process. And by that, again, once they, almost immediately after they come out of that treatment center, there is somebody there to catch them, help them to get into some sort of program and transitional housing, and then again, stabilizing their situation and helping them. So it's just kind of, the circumstance that creates it. They can't get a job, and then they can't get a job because of these circumstances. So once you have a record of being addicted to drugs, maybe even in prison for this, that's kind of where that circumstance then almost halts any progress. And so the next resource that I put out there is from the Wall Street Journal. Again, kind of the idea of a social enterprise is a company that really focuses on second chances. So if nobody else is going to take a risk by hiring somebody because of those circumstances, who will stand in the gap? And that's important. It's a very important piece that somebody will be there that you can identify in your community to be a place of second chances. And again, sometimes, it might be the church that has to stand in the gap. And then the third resource that I have here is sobergrid.com. And the reason I point that resource out is because, again, during the time of isolation, everything seems to have gone virtual. Pastor Kohlbaum and I were just kind of joking about how we've had to shift so much in our ministry these days over to digital. Well, you can imagine during social isolation and people being quarantined and being alone, just how difficult that makes it. But there is this app that allows you to, as a pastor, an agency, to work with the person to get them the specific help, again, from the clinical perspective. You have coaches who have come out of addiction themselves who are there. You have a virtual community, and yet you also are able to continue with your ministry. So during those times of isolation and quarantine, you might want to consider looking at Sober Grid as a resource to help in the gap until you can kind of be in person with those folks again. And then the last one that I put in here was from the Health and Human Services Department. That was part of what I did with this panel and the Denarius Project was putting together a practical toolkit. So there's a toolkit for any congregation or agency to think about practical ways to prevent people falling into opioid addiction, and then also practical ways to help them in the recovery process. So those are four important resources that I wanted to make sure that I pointed out. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I did, though, during our time was just to talk to me about what I've kind of discovered in my years of ministry and working with others. Why mercy with dignity? What does that mean to me at a personal level? And for me, one of the things that I just wanted to point out is that there are some good-hearted people, again, that want to come and they want to volunteer and they want to participate, but they just don't realize the posture that we take many times towards those poor and addicted that we minister to. It is so easy for us to really be like the rich man in the story of the rich man and Lazarus. I mean, the rich man would see this groveling beggar there at his gate, and every single day he would walk by Lazarus, and what was his posture? It was looking down his nose at this person as almost being less than human. It was interesting for me to spend an evening with a group of homeless people. Many of them were recovering from addictions, and to live a day in their life and to really, for myself, for the first time, understand what that felt like to be treated not just like a second-class citizen, but almost to be treated as a subhuman. It was the first time in my life where I'd ever felt like a business owner or a shop wanted me to leave. A mother with their child would scoot them off to the other side of the park to avoid me. You really can't understand until you walk a day in their shoes what it feels like to be treated in a subhuman way an entire day. And then what fascinated me too, and what was one of the most rewarding parts of that was I went to a corner where there was going to be a feeding ministry. A young gentleman walked up to me and offered me a plate of food. And the thing that got me the most was that he, after this whole day of being treated like a subhuman, he called me sir. That was it. And so I just kind of broke down. And I kind of gave it away that even though I was kind of embedding myself and I had changed my clothes so I looked like I was among the group, I was actually a pastor. And I just wanted to let him know what that meant for me after being treated like a subhuman the whole entire day, to have this Christian person walk up to me, show love to me, and then he treated me with dignity and he called me sir. So we have to be so careful. Too many times we're like Job's friends. We want to pick at what did this person do to deserve this situation that they're in, that they're now addicted to drugs, they're out on the streets. We're too apt to look at ourselves as being the greater and them the lesser, and that we would help them, but at the same time still look down on them. And then another thing I wanted to point out was just at a community Christmas Day event when it comes to the importance of showing dignity with our mercy. So we would do a Christmas Day event and we would invite the community to come, and we'd have a time of devotion and food and singing, and then we would get to that place where the children would receive gifts. And so you would think that this is just the greatest thing, that we could be there to help them in a tough time, and that these families could have gifts for their children. So the kids would be brought over to the gift table. The moms would kind of, paint a smile on their face of gratitude. But all of the men, I couldn't help but notice all of the men would walk out into the hallway. And I really started to think, here we're doing something nice. And, I would have thought that they would have been a little more appreciative, that we were offering their children these gifts. But then I had to really think, and I actually talked to somebody about it too. Why would a man walk out in the hallway? Because they were so ashamed that they couldn't provide for their own kids. And that's where this idea of being more enterprising and helping people to get back on their feet, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I would have never thought of what I was doing to this man's dignity, by trying to show mercy in a way that might not have been the best way to do it. But that's why mercy with dignity is so important to me, why I take it kind of personally as well. And the other part of that also revolves around a Christmas event. And I'm going to go to Matthew 25, because we hear that so many times. As you've done it to the least of these, Jesus says, you've done it to me. And I've heard that said a million times, and I understand that here Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven, and, is really talking about judgment, and, those who fed the naked, those who cared for the very, very least, those who, when they were hungry, when they were lonely, all of those things. When we do it to the least of these, Jesus says, you've done it to me. And we're hosting this event, and we're in a gym, and our gym is full size. We would host basketball tournaments. I mean, it was a really large gym. We'd set out every single table and chair that we had, and this was to host something for our homeless veterans in the community. Again, many of them suffering from addiction, and a lot of that revolved around PTSD. But we would set out every single chair, and the thing that struck me most was that every single chair would be filled just with our homeless veterans in our city. But I couldn't help but notice, again, we had plenty of volunteers. We had lots and lots of people that were there. They were willing to hand out things and do things. But the whole point of the event was that nobody be alone or in need on Christmas Day. And I couldn't help but notice, yet again, so many guys just sitting at a table by themselves, and none of the volunteers were talking to them. And so I walked over to one of the guys myself. We'll just call him Joe. And I couldn't help but notice when I looked at Joe that, it was kind of difficult and uncomfortable to sit with him. I mean, he had these bloodshot eyes. He had this toothless smile. He had his lips that were kind of all messed up from the crack pipe. He had all the marks up and down his arms, kind of like the wolf's bite there on his forearms. And it was kind of uncomfortable, and I understood that. But as I was thinking about Matthew 25, and I'm looking at Joe, and he's giving me this toothless smile, and I'm looking at these bloodshot eyes, I thought about what Jesus says there. Jesus is referred to in Scripture with three titles: prophet, priest, and king. And which title does Jesus use in Matthew 25? He says, as you have done it to the least of these, you have done it to me. And he uses the title king. Now, it's easy for me to look at Matthew 25, and when I think the least, that means I am the greatest. I am here to lower myself. I am the Christ figure here to rescue you and to help you. And yet, what does Jesus do? He completely flips that around. He says, as you have done it to the least of these, you have done it to me, your king. And what did that make Joe sitting at the table? That made him the honored guest that day. That I had the privilege to serve royalty at my table in this person, Joe. That God loved Joe so much that he would give everything for his salvation. And so when we think about showing mercy, that's what we should be thinking about. We should be thinking about giving them the dignity they deserve as royalty, because they are children of God. And Jesus himself has told us, as you have done it to the least of these, you have done it to me, your King. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's fantastic. I don't even know what to say at this point. I love the incarnational way of being the hands and feet of Christ there, but then not being the Christ-like figure, but instead being the one who gets to serve the King. I just love that imagery.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I appreciate very much that dirty, unclean versus clean, the mercy
Mhm.
with dignity. I think so oftentimes, it's especially difficult for our congregation members. I mean, we train professionals. We've got it all right, right? But especially for our congregational members and we ourselves, it's easy to fall into that trap. And I think that's the beauty of this kind of mindset and of this project's fantastic. Folks, if you have any questions for Pastor Schave, please get them into that attendee chat or that question feature. Steve, where can folks go if they want to connect with you to learn more about this? What's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, if you go, sorry, Todd, but it's lcms.org/city mission. That's where
That's okay. It's okay. We're all in
that's
the
where I
same boat
land.
together, right?
That's where I land. But you can find lots of resources to help you to get these ministries started, and you can find all my contact information. And happy to talk to you and just to, talk about my experiences working with the Health and Human Services Department on how you can kind of again work as a community to collaborate with others, because we can't do it all. And yet at the same time, again, this is such a spiritual thing, Todd. You cannot count out prayer over people. You can't count out word and sacrament ministry for people. No government agency is going to transform the heart of someone. And even that's why they reach out to faith-based organizations, because they understand that you cannot rule out the importance of the church having our place in all this.
Well, I think so often we like to compartmentalize everything, and when we do that, we kind of pigeonhole ourselves into just being that social services caregiver instead of that spiritual caregiver as well. And we
Right.
don't want it can't be an either or. It's got to be a both and. We don't want to ever divorce one from the other. We do have a question here. Matthew would like you to share your address one more time.
Oh, sorry. LCMS.org for the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and then it's /City Mission, one word, City Mission.
Yeah. You can also just go to the LCMS website, lcms.org, and hunt around on the What We Do tab is also a good place to find everybody. And okay, yeah, the question is, can you tell us about the Denarius project? Matthew, I'm not sure what I think that's what Steve was doing, but maybe more contact information on that.
Yeah, so specifically, again, it's kind of creating awareness, the idea of why we care, why the church is involved, but specifically encouraging congregations and agencies to think about if there is a gap there, again, this should be collaborative. If there's already an organization that hires people that are willing to take a second chance with people, that's great. But just as an example, in the inner city in Cincinnati, we helped with launching a cafe. And one of the stories was of a guy spent 40 years in computer industry, and all of a sudden, falls into addiction. Everything, in his life just falls apart. Can't find anybody that's willing to hire somebody with his circumstance. But this cafe gave him the second chance. And again, all encompassing, he says it's the first time he felt welcomed, it's the first time he felt loved. So all those things, giving him hope because he found work through this cafe, and then also had the love and the support of loving Christians, really helped him with the recovery process. So it gets you thinking in those enterprising ways. Is there a way that we can stand in the gap? We've got one inner city project where the only industry in this neighborhood is gang-related drug sales, and so they said we're gonna take guys out of gangs, teach them a trade, get them a starter job so that they can find new ways of employment. But that's what we call social enterprise. When faith-based organizations are involved, and again, it's just because there's this gap when no one else is willing to help people to have a second chance. That's where these kind of enterprising ways. It can be as simple. Also, I've been involved a lot of times in food pantries where it's giving away food. Those kind of things can be kind of converted over to more of a food co-op where it's community based and people do have to pay in a little bit and they kind of run things through the community versus just an organization doing things transactional. I'd mentioned the Christmas presents. I've heard better ways of doing that where you actually have a Christmas store where you can have a mom that comes in and works at the store for a couple hours and she earns enough, to be able to pay for Christmas presents for the kids. So just ways that give people their dignity. Every human being is created in the image of God. Every person has capacity. So again, there are going to be times where somebody is just an emergency aid, needs take care of it right away. But even in my own setting, I remember we would like pay somebody's utility bill for the month, but then I'd always ask the question, now what? What's the next step to get that person actually back on their feet, so that they can again care for their family?
Another question here. Are you familiar with the Refuge Residential Drug Rehab Program? If so, what do you think?
Oh, I'm not familiar, but I'm going to check that out when we're done. Yeah,
Yeah, thank you, Pastor. That's
yeah,
that's one we'll have to look at. Yeah, there's a couple. Um, yeah, we did a webinar several months ago on a similar. Well, I don't know about that particular one, but a similar ministry project dealing with folks with opioid abuse down in southeast Missouri. Very similar to what you're talking about, Steve, where they've made it connected to the church, and so it takes on a new aspect, not just the social services, but social services and as well as spiritual care. He said it's run by the Nazarene Church in Ohio, so
all right, go
that's your
Buckeyes,
playground. So yeah,
where I call
that's
home.
yeah. That's your one
But
big
yeah, I mean,
drawback is you're Ohio. Yeah.
well, the one time I went to go see the Buckeyes play at the Hawkeyes Stadium, it didn't go so well for me. So,
Right. Well, so you're welcome anytime. But
but
so
we are always looking for places like that, opportunities to partner. There are job placement agents. I mean, there's different. That's what I'm saying is that you need to kind of find that collaboration and who you can partner with. Yeah.
well, we need to know what we don't know so that we can start asking questions in our communities
Yeah.
and find out where the gaps are and where could we possibly have the capacity to help fill the gap in our places, because it's those intentional contacts that we can make that really open up the doors for where we can help. And unfortunately, as you stated earlier, this isn't a big city problem. It's certainly not just a rural problem. One of the bigger issues in rural is oftentimes a lot of this is hidden. It's hidden until it's
Right.
gone so far. It's tragic, and so it's not as out in the open as it maybe is in other places. So especially the functional poor in that kind of scenario in rural is really a tough situation, and we need to keep our eyes open for that and to see people not for who we see them through our sin fallen eyes, but through the lens of the cross. So, So, any other questions, really quick? If you have any, get them out there really quick, and we'll ask Pastor Schave while I've got him on the line. Otherwise, I'll mention to you we got a couple other webinars coming up. One in July, on July 23rd, we've got a consortium, I'll say, of agribusiness folks who are going to talk to us, and this will be especially poignant given the fact that that ag is suffering quite a bit here during this pandemic time, and so it will give an opportunity to look at agribusiness and how the church can help and support in those areas, especially when we have young pastors in places that don't quite understand. That'd be a great time. We got some new pastors coming out into the field, and there's over 50% of our calls again were to rural and small town areas, so be a good time for that. We're also got Daryl Zimmerman from Grace Place. He'll be doing a webinar for us in August. And then in September, we're going to be talking more about partnerships, congregational partnerships. And we've got another consortium, if you will, that'll be talking about that. Not seeing any other questions for Pastor Schave. Hey, if you want any more contact information, if you want to get this the recording of this webinar for today, please go to our website, same lcms.org/RSTM, Rural Small Town Mission, or you can just Google that, or just shoot me an email, todd.kolbaum@lcms.org, and we would be happy to get you this. We can get you the information off the PowerPoint, anything of that nature. I can put you in contact with Pastor Schave as well. So God's blessings to you all in your various ministries. Again, thank you so much, Steve, for being with us today. Fantastic stuff. I pray that it is works for us to go out and see things maybe in a new light. And so again, thank you. God's blessings to you all.
Thanks.